The millionaire CEO walked into the hospital expecting a routine visit to his ex, but what he saw made his heart stop. 3 little girls. One face. His. What happened next turned his entire life upside down. Nathan Carter wasn't a man who left things unresolved. In the world he built, polished boardrooms, airtight contracts, and carefully curated silence, loose ends didn't exist. That's why the message from a hospital doctor stopped him cold. It was brief, clinical, but impossible to ignore. Claire Evans had been admitted, and her condition was serious. She'd asked for him by name. He read the message twice, then again, as if the meaning might shift on the third read. Claire. 7 years had passed since he'd seen her. 7 years since that last fight, when the words between them had turned sharp and final. She'd left without looking back. He'd buried himself in work, building an empire of steel and order, convincing himself that she belonged to a life he no longer needed. He'd told himself the door had closed. Permanently. But here she was, or rather, here her name was, pulling at something he thought was long dead. He didn't hesitate. For all the ways she had hurt him, for all the silence between then and now, he went. Not out of obligation, and not out of guilt. Something deeper drove him, something rooted in the part of him that had never fully let go. The hospital was cold in that way only medical buildings could be. Clinical, echoing, too bright in some places and too shadowed in others. The front desk clerk gave him the room number with a practiced nod, and he made his way to the elevator, ignoring the itch of anxiety climbing up the back of his neck. He didn't know what he would find. He didn't know what she would say. But he wasn't prepared for what waited outside her door. There, sitting quietly on a bench just beside the room marked Evans, Claire, were 3 little girls. They couldn't have been more than 7, dressed in matching pink dresses with ribbons at the waist. Their shoes dangled above the floor, feet too short to touch the tiles. They weren't playing. They weren't speaking. They just sat, close together, still and alert. Nathan slowed as he approached. Something about them stopped him mid-step. One of the girls looked up. Then the other 2 followed. And that's when he saw it. The eyes. The faces. The hair. They looked exactly like him. Triplets. His heart jolted, a physical reaction he couldn't control. One of the girls tilted her head slightly, curious but calm. "Are you Mr. Carter?" she asked. Her voice was soft, polite, rehearsed. "Mama said you might come today," said the second. The third simply stared at him, wide-eyed, holding onto a small notebook like it was a shield. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The ground didn't just shift, it vanished. Claire had never told him she was pregnant. She had left without a word, and he had spent years building walls high enough to forget. But these children, 3 perfect reflections of him, broke through every layer he'd constructed. He turned toward the door but hesitated, his hand hovering just above the handle. Inside was the woman who had once been his everything. Outside were 3 little girls who might be his. He had come to the hospital expecting to offer closure. Instead, he was standing at the edge of an entirely new beginning. Nathan stood frozen at the threshold, one hand resting on the door handle, the other clenched loosely at his side. Behind him, the 3 girls had gone quiet again, as if they sensed the gravity of the moment. His mind was racing. He tried to calculate what this could mean, how it could even be possible. Triplets. 7 years old. That lined up with the timing of Claire's disappearance, and yet, not once in all these years had there been a clue. Not a word. Not a sign. It was like she had vanished into a void, and now, just as suddenly, the truth had surfaced, 3 faces that mirrored his own, sitting quietly outside her hospital room. He finally gathered himself and pushed the door open, slowly, carefully. The room was dimly lit, quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. Claire lay in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the stark white sheets, her breathing shallow but steady. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, her usual fire dimmed beneath layers of exhaustion. Yet when her eyes fluttered open and found his, something sparked, recognition, pain, and something else, relief. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice dry and thin, but unmistakable. He stepped closer, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure she could hear it. "Claire," he said, struggling to find more words, but they didn't come. So many questions, and yet none of them seemed right to ask. She tried to sit up but winced from the effort, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, easing her back into the pillow. "Don't," he said softly. "Just rest." "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I told myself I'd understand if you didn't." "I almost didn't," he admitted, taking the chair beside her bed. "I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I could face you again." Her eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Nathan. For everything. For leaving the way I did. For not telling you. I was scared." He inhaled deeply, gripping the armrest as he fought to keep his voice steady. "Are they mine?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen it written all over their faces. Claire nodded. "Yes. May, Lily, and Hope. They're yours." Nathan looked down, his vision blurring at the edges. He wasn't angry, he was overwhelmed. 7 years. 7 birthdays. 7 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, lullabies, and late-night fears. All gone. All lost. And yet, somehow, there was still time. They were still young. They were still here. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusatory, but quietly devastated. "I wanted to," Claire said. 100 times. But I knew the life you were building. I saw you rising, becoming everything you worked so hard to be. I was afraid that if I told you, it would unravel everything. That you'd come out of obligation, or worse, resentment. I didn't want them to feel unwanted." He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. "You don't get to make that choice for me." "I know," she said. "I know that now." A long silence followed. Machines beeped steadily. Somewhere down the hallway, a child laughed. Nathan sat with his hands clasped in front of him, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "They're outside," he said quietly. "Sitting right outside your room." Claire let out a soft breath. "They've been asking about you every day." "I didn't tell them much, only that there was someone I used to love, someone important. When I got sick, I told them that if anything happened, they should ask the nurses to call you. I didn't know if you'd come, but they deserve to know who you are." He looked up at her again, her face pale but still beautiful, and saw all the pain she had carried alone. All the choices she'd made, flawed, human, terrified. And somewhere deep beneath the ache of missed time, he felt something unexplainable, gratitude. Because she hadn't chosen just silence, she had chosen to protect them, even when it cost her everything. "I want to meet them," he said finally. Claire nodded slowly. "They want to meet you too." He stood, his legs unsteady, and crossed the room. When he opened the door, the girls were still there, their matching dresses a soft pop of color in the otherwise sterile hallway. They looked up at him again, waiting. Watching. Hoping. "I think," he said, voice catching slightly, "we should talk." The three of them stood. May reached for Lily's hand. Hope held her notebook tightly to her chest. They stepped toward him as one, uncertain but open. He knelt down to their level, really looking at them now, not just as strange little girls in a hallway, but as pieces of himself. It was terrifying. And it was miraculous. "My name is Nathan," he said gently. "And I think I have a lot to learn about you." Hope smiled first. A small, brave smile. Then Lily nodded. May didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto his, filled with something that looked a lot like recognition. In that moment, Nathan knew his life had already changed. Not gradually. Not someday. Now. And he wasn't running from it. He was ready to begin. Nathan had always believed that nothing in life could catch him off guard. He had built his career on precision and preparedness, on anticipating outcomes before they happened and outthinking every opponent at the table. But nothing, no boardroom, no hostile takeover, no market crash, had ever made him feel the way he felt now, sitting across from 3 7-year-old girls who looked like younger, softer versions of himself. They sat around the small hospital cafeteria table, their legs too short for the chairs, their pink dresses bright against the sterile surroundings. Each of them had a carton of apple juice in front of them, and a small pack of crackers that none of them had touched. Nathan had offered to take them downstairs for a break while the nurses checked on Claire. He thought it might help, that maybe giving them a change of scenery would make everything feel less fragile. But now, sitting here, he realized he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to talk to children, not like this, not his children. His daughters. That word still echoed inside his mind like something out of a language he didn't speak yet. Lily, the most outgoing of the three, broke the silence first. "Do you like chocolate cake?" she asked, completely serious, as if it were the most important question in the world. Caught off guard, Nathan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I do," he said. "Especially the kind with frosting that's way too sweet." She nodded solemnly, then turned to May and whispered something that made both of them giggle. Hope just watched him, quietly sipping her juice, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't quite finished yet. He leaned forward a little. "So, what do you like to do?" "You know, for fun." "Lily likes to draw animals," May said, her voice steady and low. "I like to read." "Hope writes songs, but she doesn't let anyone hear them." "I don't write songs," Hope murmured, flushing red. "You do," Lily said. "You just hide them in your notebook." Nathan smiled, heart aching a little at the thought. These girls had entire lives, habits, interests, secrets, that he had missed. They had inside jokes, routines, little sibling roles that he was only now seeing. And the strange part was how easily he wanted to be part of it all. Not as an observer. As their father. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small watch he always carried, not for time, but for memory. Claire had given it to him long ago, when they were young and stupid and in love. He didn't know why he brought it today, but now it felt like the right moment. He placed it on the table. "Your mom gave me this a long time ago," he said. "Back when we thought we had everything figured out." May leaned in to look. Lily tilted her head. Hope stared at it like it held a story she wanted to ask about but wasn't sure she should. "I don't know how much she told you about me," Nathan continued. "But I didn't know you existed until today." Hope blinked. Lily looked away. May nodded once, as if she had expected that. "She said you were busy," May said simply. "And that it wasn't your fault." Nathan felt the sting of those words deeper than he expected. Claire had protected them from the truth, but also from bitterness. Somehow, even in her absence, she had taught them grace. "I want to get to know you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you'll let me." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, but full. Full of consideration, of weight, of all the things that needed to settle in their minds before they could decide. Hope looked up first. "Do you have a house with stairs?" He blinked, surprised. "Yes. I do." "Can we visit it?" she asked, tentative, hopeful. "If you want to," he said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Lily nodded firmly. "I want to see your fridge. I bet it doesn't have any snacks." Nathan laughed for real this time. You might be right. And just like that, something shifted. The air between them warmed. Their voices became more relaxed, their questions more playful. They wanted to know if he could drive fast cars, if he ever fell asleep at work, if he liked cartoons or hated them. He answered everything honestly, even when it made him look ridiculous. It wasn't perfect. It was awkward and halting and unfamiliar. But it was real. When they walked back upstairs, the girls stayed close to him, not clinging, but present, like a small orbit forming around him. When Claire saw them come in together, her eyes filled again, but this time with something softer. Hope climbed into the chair beside her mother. May and Lily sat near the window, watching the sky. Nathan stood beside the bed and met Claire's gaze. I want to be part of their lives, he said, voice low but firm. Not just when it's convenient. All of it. School mornings. Nightmares. Piano recitals. Whatever comes. Claire nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. You already are, she said. And somehow, he believed her. Nathan had never been more aware of time than he was now. Time that had passed. Time that had been stolen. Time he couldn't get back, no matter how hard he tried. As he sat at the foot of Claire's hospital bed later that evening, watching the slow rhythm of her breathing as she drifted in and out of sleep, he couldn't help but think about the 7 birthdays he had missed, the scraped knees he hadn't kissed, the nightmares he hadn't soothed. Guilt settled deep in his chest, not the sharp, immediate kind, but the kind that lingers like a slow burn. The kind that builds every time he heard one of the girls say something casual that hinted at an entire history he wasn't there for. The nurses said Claire's vitals were stable, but her immune system was fragile, and her body was exhausted. She needed rest, proper care, and support. Nathan made a decision without hesitation. He arranged for a private in-home nurse to be available once she was discharged, and he called his legal team to begin the process of establishing temporary guardianship of the girls in case Claire's condition worsened. He didn't wait for her permission, not because he wanted control, but because he finally understood what it meant to protect someone before they asked for it. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep on the small couch in Claire's room, curled against each other like puzzle pieces, Nathan stepped out into the hallway and called Monica, his longtime assistant. She had seen him through every major merger, every scandal, every last-minute flight to Tokyo or Zurich, but she had never heard his voice like this. Not uncertain. Not composed. Human. He told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, there was a long pause on the other end. Then, tell me what you need, and I'll handle the rest. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital with a bag full of essentials for the girls, clothes, pajamas, coloring books, even 3 identical toothbrushes with cartoon animals on them. She didn't ask questions. She just moved around him like she always had, quiet and efficient. Nathan watched as she knelt down and greeted the girls like old friends, not clients, not strangers. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something like hope. They didn't go back to his high-rise apartment. He knew instinctively that it wasn't the right place. It was too cold, too quiet, too full of glass and marble and nothing else. Instead, he rented a small house just outside the city, temporary, furnished, but warm. It had a backyard and 3 bedrooms and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. It wasn't perfect, but it felt more like a beginning than anything else he could offer them. When they arrived, the girls explored with cautious curiosity. Lily immediately claimed the smallest room and asked if she could paint the walls yellow. May wandered into the kitchen and checked every cabinet like she was inspecting the space for hidden problems. Hope found the window seat in the living room and sat there quietly, legs crossed, watching birds outside as if she had been waiting for a window like that her entire life. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched them all, unsure of what to say, of how to begin. It wasn't until Lily tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Do we live here now?" that he realized he didn't need the perfect words. "For as long as you want," he said. "This is your home now." That night, he made them grilled cheese sandwiches that came out slightly burnt but still edible. They sat around a round wooden table that wobbled when someone leaned too hard, and they told him little things, what their teacher's name was, who had the best jokes in class, how May once fell into a pond trying to save a frog. He listened to every word like it was gold. When it was time for bed, they brushed their teeth in a line, all three spitting into the sink at once and laughing about it. He tucked each one in, asked if they needed anything, and then stood outside their doors for a while after they'd gone quiet, listening for signs of restlessness or fear. There was none. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with a blanket over his shoulders, Claire's medical report on the table beside him, and a glass of water growing warm in his hand. He stared out the window, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, and wondered how much one person's life could change in just a few days. The man who had walked into that hospital a few days ago was gone. This man, who burned sandwiches and bought princess-themed toothpaste and learned to braid hair from a YouTube video, was someone entirely new. He didn't know what the next day would bring. He didn't know how to be a perfect father. But he was here. He had shown up. And he was never walking away again. The days that followed felt like a balancing act on unfamiliar ground. Nathan woke early each morning, not to check stock reports or prep for investor meetings, but to quietly walk down the hallway and peek into 3 separate bedrooms to make sure each of the girls was still tucked beneath the blankets. Sometimes Lily had kicked hers off, one leg dangling over the edge of the bed. May usually lay perfectly still, arms crossed beneath her pillow. Hope, almost always, was curled up tight, hugging a stuffed rabbit Monica had picked out. The simple act of seeing them there brought him a peace he couldn't name, but it also deepened the ache in his chest. He was a stranger learning to be needed. The morning routine became sacred, though rarely smooth. Someone always spilled something: orange juice, cereal, toothpaste. Arguments over who got the blue spoon or which hairband matched which dress were now part of Nathan's reality. He learned to tie ponytails that weren't too tight and not too loose. He memorized how May liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, how Hope didn't like anything touching on her plate, and how Lily insisted on packing her own lunch even if it meant there was nothing but crackers and a single banana inside. These weren't details he expected to know at 42, but they became the most important metrics in his life. Claire was still recovering. She'd been discharged but was staying at a small care facility where she could rebuild her strength under supervision. Nathan visited her every day after dropping the girls off at school, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting beside her while she rested. They didn't talk about the past much, there was too much in the present that needed tending. But every now and then, when the girls came up in conversation, their eyes would meet, and something unspoken passed between them. Regret. Gratitude. A shared understanding that they were rewriting something that had almost been lost. One evening, just after dinner, a knock came at the door. Nathan had just finished helping Lily with her homework while the others drew pictures at the table. He opened it without thinking and came face to face with a man he didn't recognize, mid-50s, pressed shirt, a face that held both familiarity and something cold. The man introduced himself as Richard Evans, Claire's father. Nathan hadn't known he was still alive. Claire had never spoken of him much, only that their relationship had been strained for most of her life. Now here he was, standing at the front door, eyes scanning the hallway behind Nathan before settling on him with a look that held no warmth. "I heard what's happened," Richard said. "About Claire. And the girls." Nathan hesitated, unsure of where this was going. "Claire is recovering. The girls are safe with me." Richard's tone sharpened. "And who exactly decided that? You walk back into her life for 5 minutes and suddenly you're playing father?" Nathan stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind him so the girls wouldn't hear. "I am their father," he said. "And I'm not playing at anything." Richard scoffed, arms crossed. You don't think it's convenient? That she didn't say a word for 7 years and now suddenly you're a hero? Nathan kept his voice low, steady. I didn't come back to be a hero. I came back because I should have been there in the first place. And I'm not going anywhere now. There was a long, charged silence. Then Richard's expression shifted, still cold, but calculated. I'm petitioning for visitation. Maybe more. Those girls are my grandchildren, whether you like it or not. Nathan felt the heat rise in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. You're not going to use them to punish Claire or to make up for what you lost with her. I won't let that happen. I'll see you in court then, Richard replied, turning on his heel and walking away. Nathan stood on the porch for a long moment, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. Trouble was coming, and not the kind he could buy his way out of. This was going to be personal. Deep. Messy. He stepped back inside and saw all 3 girls watching from the hallway, their eyes wide, sensing something had shifted. He knelt down and opened his arms, and they rushed to him without asking questions. He held them all tightly, suddenly afraid not of losing a company or a fortune, but of losing them. That night, after they'd fallen asleep, he called Claire. Told her what happened. She didn't sound surprised. Just tired. I knew he'd come eventually, she said. He doesn't know how to love. Only how to control. Nathan sat in silence, staring at the ceiling in the dark. I won't let him take them, he said. I know, Claire replied. And she believed him. For the first time in a very long time, someone truly did. The courtroom felt colder than any boardroom Nathan had ever walked into. It was smaller than he imagined, less grand, almost unimpressive in its plainness. But the weight in the air was heavier than any corporate negotiation he'd ever faced. This wasn't about numbers or contracts. It was about 3 little girls who had only just begun to see him as something steady, someone real. And now, all of it, the trust he'd spent every waking moment building, was at risk of being dismantled by a man who had no part in their lives until now. Richard Evans sat across the room, rigid and silent, his lawyer doing all the talking. They painted a picture of concern, of a grandfather stepping in to do what needed to be done after years of alleged absence by the father. The lawyer spoke about Nathan's career, his wealth, his status, subtly implying that he was too busy, too distant, too emotionally unavailable to raise 3 young girls. They referenced his public life, the lack of formal custody, the abruptness of his arrival. They even questioned Claire's judgment, suggesting that her health and mental clarity might be compromised after her illness. Nathan's jaw clenched as he listened. He had come prepared to defend himself, but he hadn't expected the accusations to feel so personal. It wasn't just about who had the legal right to raise May, Lily, and Hope. It was about whether or not he was capable of being their father, not in name, but in practice. When it was his turn to speak, Nathan stood slowly, adjusted his tie, and looked directly at the judge. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. But the emotion underneath was raw and unfiltered. I didn't know about them, he began. Not until I walked into that hospital and saw 3 girls sitting outside a room in pink dresses, looking at me with eyes I recognized as my own. Claire made a choice, one I don't agree with, but I understand it. She did what she thought was best. And from the moment I knew, I chose to stay. I chose to become a part of their world, not because it was convenient, but because I realized nothing else I've built matters as much as being their father. He paused, glancing toward the back of the room where the girls waited with Monica, out of view but not out of mind. They trust me now. Not because I bought them toys or promised them anything, but because I show up. I burn their toast. I forget what day their gym class is. I can't braid hair without messing it up, but I'm learning. Every day I'm learning. And I will never walk away from them. Not again. Not for anything. He sat down without waiting for a reaction. The judge nodded, making notes. Then, quietly, requested to speak with Claire in private, followed by the girls. It was hours before the ruling came. Nathan sat outside the chambers, knees bouncing, fingers pressed together, waiting for the door to open. When it finally did, the judge re-entered the room and asked everyone to return to their seats. The final decision came with quiet, direct authority. Claire would retain full parental rights. Nathan would be granted legal joint custody. Richard Evans' petition for guardianship was denied, though supervised visitation was permitted once a month, at Claire's discretion. Nathan barely heard the rest. Relief flooded him in a way he hadn't prepared for. Not the kind of relief that feels like celebration, but the kind that feels like finally being able to breathe after holding it in for too long. Richard didn't say a word as he left the courtroom. His expression was unreadable, but Nathan no longer cared what he thought. The damage he had tried to cause didn't stick. The truth had spoken louder than strategy. Later that evening, back at the house, the girls waited on the porch, their eyes wide and hopeful. Nathan stepped out of the car and barely had time to close the door before all three of them ran toward him. He dropped to one knee and caught them in his arms, pressing his face into the soft mess of their hair. No words. Just three little bodies clinging to him like home. That night, Claire joined them for dinner. She was stronger now, her face no longer pale, her movements more sure. They sat around the table, laughter bubbling between bites of pasta and stories about school. Hope pulled her notebook from her backpack and asked Nathan to help her write a song. Lily showed him a picture she'd drawn of their house, with 4 stick figures and a heart above them. May just smiled, quietly, like she finally believed this life was hers to keep. Nathan watched them all, heart full, knowing he hadn't won a battle. He'd been given a beginning. The weeks that followed the court decision were quieter, but not in the way that meant nothing was happening. They were the kind of quiet that meant life was beginning to settle, like dust finding its place after a storm. The girls fell into their routines like they'd always belonged there, and in many ways, Nathan felt like he had finally stepped into the role that had been waiting for him all along. It was no longer about proving himself. It was about showing up, every single day, for the 3 lives that had unexpectedly become the center of his world. Each morning, he woke up to the sound of their footsteps running through the hallway, their voices layered in chaotic harmony as they argued about who stole whose socks or who got the last waffle. There was always noise, always motion, always little fingerprints on the fridge or crayon marks on the dining table. His once silent life now pulsed with energy, and he couldn't imagine ever going back. Claire had moved into a small house nearby, close enough to be part of the girls' everyday lives, far enough to give Nathan space to grow into this new identity without a safety net. They co-parented with unspoken ease, falling into rhythm the way people do when the love between them, though changed, is still real and rooted in something deeper than romance. They spoke almost daily, mostly about the girls, May's new fascination with astronomy, Lily's attempt at organizing a sister band, Hope's quiet journaling sessions on the porch. Sometimes they talked about the past, about how different things might have been, but never with regret. Only with gratitude for the way things had come together now. Nathan surprised himself with how much he enjoyed the simplicity of it all. Picking up groceries with a list scribbled in crayon, learning how to make pancakes without burning them, sitting through a chaotic school play where Lily forgot half her lines and Hope waved at him from the stage the entire time. He started keeping photos on the fridge, something he hadn't done in over a decade. One of his favorite pictures was a blurry snapshot May had taken of him trying to comb her hair while Lily laughed uncontrollably in the background. He hadn't even known she was taking it, but when she handed him the print, shy and proud, he framed it and placed it on his desk. He still worked, he had responsibilities, a company to oversee, but he no longer allowed it to consume him. Monica helped restructure his schedule so that meetings happened between drop-offs and pickups, so that he never had to choose between being in the office and being at the parent-teacher conference. People noticed the change. His board noticed. But no one questioned it. They respected it. Nathan Carter, once known for his unshakable dedication to business, had found something greater to dedicate himself to. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Nathan sat outside on the back porch with Claire. They sipped tea under the soft hum of porch lights, the night wrapped around them like a quiet reassurance. "I used to think I broke everything," Claire said, voice barely above a whisper. "When I left, I thought I was protecting them. But some nights I wondered if I had ruined everything instead." "You didn't," Nathan said gently. "You protected them the best way you knew how. You protected me too, even if I didn't understand it then." Claire looked at him for a long time. "And you became everything I hoped you would be for them." He didn't answer right away. He just looked toward the house, imagining the three girls fast asleep inside, their soft breathing filling up the silence of rooms that used to be empty. "They saved me," he said finally. "Not the other way around." They didn't need to say more. The quiet between them was full of peace, of second chances that had somehow worked. Later that week, May came home with a permission slip for a school project called Our Family, Our Story. Each child was supposed to bring in something personal to share, an object, a photo, a memory that represented who they were and where they came from. The night before the presentation, she asked Nathan to help her choose. He showed her the watch Claire had given him years ago, the one he had carried in his pocket the day he met the girls. She held it in her small hands for a long time, then nodded. "This feels right," she said. He walked her to school the next morning, the other two girls skipping ahead. At the classroom door, May turned back and whispered, "I'm glad you came to the hospital that day." Nathan smiled. "Me too." Then she disappeared into the crowd of children, clutching a piece of his past in her hand. And Nathan stood there for a moment longer, feeling like, for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The morning of the girl's 8th birthday began with sunlight streaming through the windows and the scent of vanilla pancakes filling the kitchen. Nathan had woken up before dawn, determined to make breakfast himself even though he knew Monica would have gladly handled it. But this was something he needed to do. The house was still quiet, filled with that soft, warm stillness that only came before something special. He had wrapped their gifts the night before, 3 identical boxes with different colored ribbons, each carefully labeled with their names. Inside were lockets, silver and simple, engraved with the words, "Always, no matter what." As he flipped the last pancake onto a plate, he heard footsteps running down the hallway. The girls burst into the kitchen together, their hair still wild from sleep, their eyes shining with anticipation. Lily shouted, "It smells like cake," and Hope wrapped her arms around his waist without a word. May climbed onto a stool and looked at the table, her smile calm and certain. Nathan watched them and felt it again, that quiet sense of awe he had never been able to put into words. A year ago, he hadn't known they existed. Now, he couldn't imagine a life without them. Every chaotic moment, every tear and tantrum and bedtime story had built something between them that felt unbreakable. They ate together, the girls giggling over syrup and planning their own birthday party as if it were a royal event. Later that afternoon, Claire arrived, bringing a cake she'd made herself, chocolate with raspberry filling, exactly the way Lily liked it. They set up balloons in the backyard, hung a banner across the fence, and let the girls invite a few close friends from school. It wasn't a glamorous event by any means, but it was full of color, laughter, and that unmistakable energy that comes when people feel truly loved. As the sun began to set, the girls gathered on a blanket in the grass, tearing open cards and whispering secrets to each other. Nathan watched from the porch, his arms crossed, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Claire came to stand beside him, holding a glass of lemonade, her expression content. "She told me," Claire said, gesturing toward May, "that she wants to be a writer." Nathan nodded. "She already is. She just doesn't know it yet." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the three of them laugh so hard they tipped over onto the blanket in a tangle of limbs and squeals. It didn't matter that the yard wasn't perfect, that the fence leaned a little, or that the decorations were crooked. It was real. It was alive. After the party, once the guests had gone home and the backyard had fallen quiet, Nathan brought out the 3 gift boxes and placed them on the kitchen table. The girls gathered around, eyes wide, not expecting more after the cake and games. He knelt down and handed each one their box. "I wanted you to have something to remember," he said. "Something that's just yours." They opened them slowly, carefully. Inside each was a locket, the same shape but with different engravings inside. For May, it read, "You see what others miss." For Lily, "You bring the light." For Hope, "Your quiet is powerful." The girls didn't say anything at first. Then Lily reached forward and hugged him tightly, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. May smiled and held the locket in her hand like something precious. Hope simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you," in a voice so quiet it made his heart ache. That night, after everyone was asleep, Nathan stood in the hallway outside their rooms. He listened to the sounds of soft breathing, the occasional rustle of sheets, the house wrapped in the kind of peace that can't be bought or forced. It had taken him years to find this, to understand that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about presence. It was about returning, over and over, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about showing up when it mattered most. He walked back to his room, opened his nightstand drawer, and placed the extra locket inside, the 4th one he'd had made just in case. It read, "Always, no matter what, just like the others." He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe for the future. Maybe for someone who would need reminding. Or maybe, he thought, it was just for him. Before he turned out the light, he looked around the room and felt it, not pride, not relief, but something simpler. Wholeness. Everything he had once feared had led him here. And finally, he wasn't running anymore. What makes the ending of this story so powerful isn't just the resolution, it's the quiet transformation of a man who had everything, yet didn't realize what he was missing until it looked him in the eyes and called him, Dad. Nathan's journey isn't about a dramatic twist or a grand redemption arc, it's about something deeper and more honest, learning to show up, to stay, to love without conditions. The final chapter isn't wrapped in perfection, but in truth. It reminds us that family doesn't always come when we expect it, but when it does, we have a choice, to run, or to rise. And Nathan chose to rise. That, to me, is the heart of it all.